The bulldozer came through my wife's bedroom wall at 5:55 on a Tuesday morning. Bethany was asleep. The contractor had been told the wall was an outbuilding. He had been told that by Penelope Whitford Briarcliff, HOA board president of Bluegrass Ridge Estates, Kentucky, 49, polished, blonde, holding a photoshopped satellite map in a white HOA polo at the edge of my pasture. Bethany ran out the back in her nightgown. Penelope picked up her phone and called 911 to claim the homeowner had just come out with a gun. The 911 call routed to the Marlow County Sheriff's Department. "I am Anson Tilbury. I am the Marlow County Sheriff. I took the call at the radio at 6:02 a.m. I was on my way home in a marked cruiser by 6:03. By 7, the contractor was in handcuffs, Penelope was in cuffs, and her HOA was facing 6 felonies. What would you do if a stranger nearly killed your wife in her own bed? Where are you watching from tonight? Stay with me. My great-great-grandfather, Joseph Tilbury, bought the 18 acres just outside what is now the town of Marlow Springs, Kentucky, in October of 1893. He paid $420 to a tobacco family named Halsey, who had owned the parcel since the Civil War. The deed was handwritten on linen rag paper. Joseph built the original 4-room farmhouse himself in the spring of 1894. Out of yellow poplar he milled on the property. 5 generations of Tilburys have lived in that farmhouse. The original 2 front rooms still have the same chestnut beams Joseph cut. I was born in the back bedroom in 1966. My father, Hollis Tilbury, added the south wing, a master bedroom, bath, and small sitting room, in 1985 as a 45th anniversary present to my mother. The south wing has a stone fireplace I helped him lay when I was 19. The fireplace is the heart of the house. The stones came from the back creek bed. I know which stones I set. I know which stones he set. I have been the Marlow County Sheriff since 2014. 3 consecutive terms. Before that I was a Kentucky State Trooper for 19 years. Working the Central Kentucky beat, with 12 years as a detective in the Crimes Against Persons unit. I was not, by anyone's estimation, an obvious sheriff candidate. I am a quiet man. I have lost 10 pounds in the years since I took the job. I do not love a press conference. I do love this county. The voters in 2014 had been worried about a corrupt, outgoing sheriff who had been indicted in his last year. They had been looking for a man with no ambition for higher office and a clean reputation. I had been recommended by my old KSP captain. I had been the right kind of boring. I had won by 22 points. I won re-election by 30 in 2018 and by 38 in 2022. My wife Bethany and I were married in October of 1996 at the Tilbury family chapel my grandfather had built behind the spring house. She had been a horse trainer at a hunter-jumper stable outside Lexington for 6 years when we met. After we married, she moved her operation to our property. Tilbury Stables now boards 6 horses on 6 acres of fenced pasture at the back of our property. Bethany teaches 3 days a week and trains 2 days a week. She has run the operation by herself for 28 years. She has a national reputation in the hunter ring as a trainer of careful horses. She is 56. She is the toughest small person I have ever met. She is also the only woman I have ever loved. Our son Tobias is 22, a senior at the University of Kentucky studying agricultural economics. Our daughter Lucinda is 17, a senior at Marlow County High School with a 4.1 GPA and a college acceptance from the University of Louisville she has not yet decided whether to accept. They are good kids. They are quiet the way their mother is quiet. They have grown up in the same back bedroom I was born in. The south wing has been their parents' room since 1985. The south wing is the room my mother died in 2001, with my father holding her hand. The south wing is the room my father died in 2011, with me holding his. The south wing is the room my wife sleeps in beside me every night. The south wing is the wall Penelope Whitford Briarcliff put a bulldozer through. The 18 acres run east from the road, gently downhill, to a small creek my great-great-grandfather called Joseph's Branch. The branch is fed by a spring that has never gone dry in 131 years. The spring house my grandfather built in 1947 is still standing and still cold in August. The farm has been a small mixed operation for most of its life. Tobacco for the first 40 years, dairy for the next 30, beef cattle in the 70s and 80s, and now Bethany's horses. My father had sold off the cattle in 1991 because the milk parlor had needed too much work and he had not had it in him to start over. He had kept the 18 acres in pasture and woodlot. I have kept them the same way. The eastern 5 acres is hardwood, white oak, walnut, sugar maple, that my father had cataloged for me at age 10 with hand-drawn cards that are still in a wooden box on my desk. I have not allowed a tree to be cut on the 5 acres since 1991. The card box has not been opened by anyone but me in 33 years. The original 4-room farmhouse and the 1985 south wing sit on a small rise above the branch. The chicken coop my father built in 1979 sits 10 feet south of the property line with Bluegrass Ridge Estates. The spring house sits 20 feet north of the same line. The barn, built by Joseph in 1898 and re-roofed 3 times, sits 120 paces east of the house, on the bank above the creek. Tilbury Stables operates out of the original barn and a smaller indoor arena Bethany and I built ourselves in 2008. The arena is 60 by 120 feet. We poured the slab ourselves on a hot Saturday in July. The pour took 8 hours. We had Bethany's father and a Lexington contractor crew and Edmund Brewster and 3 of my deputies all helping. The slab still has all of our handprints set in a small line at the north end. Lucinda was 1 year old that summer. Her tiny handprint is the last one in the line. Bluegrass Ridge Estates was built across the south fence line in 2008 on what had been the back 40 of the Halsey tobacco farm. Different Halseys from the original 1893 sellers, just a Marlowe County coincidence of the same surname. 48 homes around a small lake, a clubhouse, a pickleball court. The development had been quiet for 12 years under a series of polite retirees. The HOA board had paid $2 a month to no one, and run their meetings at the clubhouse with a sense of small-town courtesy. Penelope Whitford Briarcliff moved into Lot 14 of Bluegrass Ridge Estates in February of 2020 with her husband Gunnar Briarcliff, a Lexington oral surgeon who specialized in cosmetic implants. They had paid $890,000 cash. Penelope had been a hospital marketing executive in Cincinnati. She drove a white Mercedes GLE. She wore the kind of athleisure that comes with a small fabric tag stating its country of origin. She got herself elected HOA board president in May of 2021 by a vote of 31 to 17. She ran on a platform of enhancing Bluegrass Ridge's market positioning. She won because the previous president was tired, and the alternative candidate was retired Air Force Colonel Edmund Brewster, who declined the seat after his wife's stroke. I had wished, in retrospect, that Edmund had taken the seat. Edmund and his wife are now my wife's closest friends. Penelope wrote me her first letter on the 18th of August, 2021. The letter was on Bluegrass Ridge Estates HOA letterhead. The letter requested that I voluntarily remove the non-conforming outbuilding visible from Lot 14's back deck. The outbuilding in question was a 6 by 8 foot cedar chicken coop and garden shed my father had built in 1979, located 10 feet inside our fence line from the HOA property. The coop has held the same 6 laying hens for the past 5 years. The shed contains Bethany's gardening tools and a small wooden bench Tobias built in 7th grade. The coop and shed predate the HOA by 29 years. The shed is the structure Penelope would later try to make Heath Brenner demolish. The shed is the structure she would, in her forged demolition order, mistakenly identify by photographing the south wing of our house instead. I responded politely. I explained that my property predated the HOA by a century. I explained that I was not a member of the HOA and had no obligation to comply with HOA rules. I sent the letter certified mail. I framed the return receipt. Between August of 2021 and April of 2024, Penelope filed 23 complaints against my property. 8 with Marlow County Code Enforcement, 3 with the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, alleging that Tilbury Stables was an unlicensed commercial enterprise. Bethany had been licensed since 1996. 2 with the Kentucky State Police, alleging that I was suspicious. 1 with the IRS, alleging that Bethany's stable was underreporting income. 1 with the Marlow County Board of Education, alleging that Lucinda was frequently truant. Lucinda had a 98.2% attendance record. 1 with the Better Business Bureau against Bethany's stables, which the BBB politely declined to act on. The KSP complaint about my suspicion had been routed, through interagency standard procedure, to my own office. I had read it at my desk. My chief deputy, Captain Edmund Brewster, same name as the retired colonel, no relation, just a Marlow County coincidence, had pinned it to the staff bulletin board. The staff had laughed for 2 days. She did not know I was the sheriff. I had not advertised it. I drove a personal 1998 Chevy Silverado to and from the house. I kept my marked cruiser at the office. I wore civilian clothes on my own porch. The mailbox at the road said Tilbury in white block letters. It did not say sheriff. The Bluegrass Ridge residents who knew me knew, generally, that I was a Tilbury, and that the Tilburys had owned the 18 acres for 131 years. Penelope had never bothered to ask. Penelope ran the HOA the way a particular kind of person runs a small group with too much spare time. She passed a community aesthetic charter that ran 28 pages in her first year. She passed a mailbox color amendment in her second. She passed a mulch shade ordinance in her third. She had fined a retired Air Force colonel, Edmund Brewster, for a wreath he had hung on his front door in November of 2022, because the wreath was non-conforming with the approved holiday decor list. Edmund had paid the $50 fine in cash with a typed letter that read, in full, Mrs. Whitford Briarcliff, I served 37 years in the United States Air Force, and I have never seen a more useless piece of paper than your wreath citation. Enclosed, please find your $50. Please do not waste my time again. Edmund had framed his copy of the citation alongside the letter. He had shown it to me on his porch in December, over a glass of his wife's homemade eggnog. I had laughed for a long time. So had Edmund. Marjorie had not laughed. She had said in her quiet voice, She is going to do something irreparable, Anson. I can feel it. I had told her she was probably right. She had been right. In March of 2024, her financial situation got bad. Gunner's Lexington practice had been losing money for 3 quarters under a malpractice cloud he had not disclosed to Penelope until late February. They were behind on the mortgage on Lot 14 by 2 payments. They were behind on the Mercedes lease by 1. They had 2 private school tuitions for Penelope's daughters from a previous marriage due on the 1st of April. Penelope had been quietly diverting HOA dues to her personal LLC, Briarcliff Aesthetic Services, registered in Kenton County, Kentucky, for 31 consecutive months at $4,000 per month. By April, she had embezzled $124,000. Captain Brewster would later find the records. Captain Brewster would later find the forged signatures. Captain Brewster would later find a great many things. Penelope decided, in early April, that the only way to fix her finances was to force me to sell the 18 acres. She had no legal mechanism to compel the sale. She had been told this by her HOA's outside counsel and by her own family attorney. She decided to take a more direct route. She decided to scare me. She found Heath Brenner through a Craigslist ad. Heath was 46. He ran a one-man demolition business out of Versailles, Kentucky. He had 3 small kids and a wife who worked at the Kroger in Lexington. He was, by every account that emerged later, a decent man who had been having a hard year. Penelope contacted him on the 7th of April. She offered him $8,000 cash for a one-morning emergency demolition of an abandoned outbuilding on a property adjacent to mine. She told him the structure was approximately 20 by 30 feet, that it was a hazard to community children, and that she had a county emergency demolition order in hand. She told him the work needed to happen at first light on a Tuesday to avoid traffic. The county emergency demolition order she emailed Heath was, in fact, a forged document. She had downloaded a real Marlow County demolition order from 2022 from the publicly accessible county records. She had photoshopped my address onto it. She had photoshopped the signature block. She had photoshopped a satellite image of my property with a red rectangle drawn around it. The rectangle was drawn around the south wing of my house. She had not drawn it around the chicken coop. She had assumed, looking at the satellite image from her Lot 14 deck, that the south wing was the outbuilding. She had been wrong. She had not, apparently, ever walked the property closely enough to tell the difference. Heath received the email at 4:15 p.m. on the 7th of April. He printed it. He scheduled the job for the morning of the 9th at 6 a.m. He brought his Caterpillar D5 dozer on a lowboy trailer. On the morning of the 9th, I was up at 4. I had an early sheriff's department briefing at 5:30. Bethany was still asleep at 5:30 when I kissed her forehead. She had been training a difficult horse the previous afternoon and had taken her usual half dose of melatonin at 9:30 p.m. She would normally not have woken until 7. I drove to the office in my Silverado in the dark. The office is 6 minutes from the house. I arrived at 5:38. Captain Brewster was already there with coffee. Heath Brenner unloaded the D5 from his lowboy at the east edge of Bluegrass Ridge Estates at 5:46 a.m. Penelope met him at the south corner of her lot in HOA polo and yoga pants. She handed him the printed satellite image and walked him to the corner of my fence. She pointed at the south wing of our farmhouse. She told him that was the outbuilding. She told him the fence line was just an old decorative boundary. She told him to go ahead. Heath, looking at her, looking at her HOA polo, looking at the printed map, looking at the wall she had pointed at, climbed onto the dozer and started the engine at 5:52 a.m. The dozer crossed Penelope's lawn at 5:53. It crossed our fence line at 5:54. It impacted the south wing wall at 5:55. Bethany was in our bed. The wall came apart slow. Pine clapboard cracks slow. The interior drywall came after. The wall above our headboard collapsed inward. Insulation and pink fiberglass and chunks of plaster fell across Bethany's pillow. The lamp on the nightstand fell to the floor and shattered. The framed photograph of our wedding fell off the dresser. The dozer blade pushed 11 feet into the room before Heath stopped the engine, looked up at what he had done, and saw the bed. Saw the bed. Saw a woman in a nightgown sitting up in the bed with her hair in fiberglass and her hands over her face, screaming. Saw the chestnut beam my father had set in 1985 split in half above her head. Saw the stone fireplace at the far end of the room with my mother's photograph on the mantel, untouched. He climbed down off the dozer in slow motion. He started to run toward Bethany. Penelope, standing at the fence line, screamed, "Heath, no! Do not touch her! Get back on the dozer!" He did not get back on the dozer. He stood in the middle of our bedroom with insulation in his beard and stared at my wife. Bethany was, by every miracle, not seriously hurt. She had a small cut on her forehead from a piece of falling plaster. She had a bruise on her right shoulder where the headboard had splintered. She had glass dust in her hair from the lamp. The miracle of the bed's position became a topic of quiet conversation among the structural engineers who later examined the damage. The KSP scene investigators called in a structural consultant from the University of Kentucky's engineering department, a professor named Mason Lockwood, to assess the integrity of the remaining structure before any rebuild could proceed. Professor Lockwood walked the room for 2 hours on the second day after the incident. He measured the angle of the dozer's approach. He measured the angle of the wall failure. He measured the trajectory of the chestnut beam break. He measured the angle of the headboard's splinter pattern. At the end of his assessment, he sat with me on the porch and said, in his careful Kentucky soft voice, "Sheriff, I have evaluated approximately 300 residential collapses in my career. The bed in that room was placed by your father in 1985 on the only wall in the entire south wing that was not perpendicular to the line of approach from the property line. He had no way of knowing that would matter 40 years later. He placed it there because, your wife later told me, your mother had wanted the morning light on her face. That is the only reason your wife is alive. I have not seen a stranger geometry in my career. I have not seen a kinder one. I had not been able to speak. Professor Lockwood had stood up. He had put his hand on my shoulder. He had walked to his truck. She did not, by any examination, have a concussion. The bed had been positioned, in 1985 when my parents built the room, on the only wall that was not perpendicular to the line of approach. The bulldozer had hit at a 40-degree angle. The frame had taken the brunt. The mattress had taken the second brunt. Bethany had taken the third. She would tell me later, at the hospital, "Anson, your father built this room to last. He saved my life this morning." She would say it without crying. She would say it with her head on my chest. She would say it the way she said everything that mattered. Quiet, certain, true. She did not have a phone. She did not have shoes. She climbed off the bed, stepped over the pile of drywall, walked past Heath Brenner in a torn nightgown, and ran out the back door barefoot into the April morning. She ran across the lawn to the barn. She did have a phone, in the barn. The office phone next to the tack room. She picked it up. She dialed 911. She told the dispatcher in 3 sentences what had happened. She gave our address. She asked them to please send someone right now. The dispatcher took her name. The dispatcher dispatched the call. The call went out over the Marlow County Sheriff's Department radio at 6:01 a.m. Penelope, who had run from the fence line toward Heath when he had stopped the dozer, had heard Bethany run past her into the barn. Penelope had panicked. Penelope had picked up her own phone. Penelope had called 911 at 6:02 a.m. She had told the dispatcher, in a voice that the recording would later show was a rehearsed voice, that the homeowner at 1147 Tilbury Lane has just come out of the house screaming and waving a firearm at me and my contractor. She had been specific about the firearm. She had said, a long gun. She had said the words, "I am afraid for my life." She had given her name. She had given her location. The dispatcher had thanked her. The dispatcher had dispatched the second call. The second call went out over the same radio at 6:03. Let me describe the briefing room for a moment, because the room was the place the call came into. The Marlow County Sheriff's Department briefing room is on the second floor of the 1925 Courthouse Annex on Main Street in Marlow Springs. The room has 11 folding chairs, a long oak table, a corkboard on the south wall with departmental announcements, and a small refrigerator in the corner stocked with Captain Brewster's wife's banana bread. The radio sits at the head of the table. The radio is a black Motorola with a long whip antenna and a small green pilot light. It is hooked into the county dispatch grid and the Kentucky State Police Regional Channel and the Marlow County Emergency Services Network. Every officer in the briefing room can hear every call that comes in. The briefing was the standard Tuesday morning briefing. Captain Brewster had been running through the previous 24 hours reports. 2 minor traffic incidents, 1 domestic dispute, 1 stolen lawnmower. We had been moving through the agenda the way we moved through the agenda every Tuesday. There had been 6 of us in the room. The dispatcher's voice over the radio at 6:01 stopped Captain Brewster mid-sentence. I was in the briefing room at 6:01 when the first call came over. The dispatcher's voice was the careful voice she used when the address was a residence on a friendly road. Marlow County Sheriff's, all units, residential structural emergency, 1147 Tilbury Lane. Female caller reports a bulldozer through her bedroom wall. No injuries reported. Please respond. Captain Brewster looked at me. I looked at Captain Brewster. Sergeant Hardy looked at both of us. Deputy Lila Pemberton stood up from her coffee cup and said in a voice I had never heard her use, "Sheriff, that's Bethany." I was already walking toward the door. The second call came over the radio as I was opening the cruiser door. The dispatcher's voice was different this time. The dispatcher's voice carried a small tightness. Marlow County Sheriff's, all units. Second caller reports armed homeowner at 1147 Tilbury Lane. Caller identifies as Penelope Whitford Briarcliff. Caller states homeowner brandished a long gun. Please use caution. I stood with the cruiser door open. I keyed my radio. I said in the calmest voice I could find, "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Tilbury. The address is my home. The caller is mistaken. I am responding now in marked Unit 1. Captain Brewster behind me in Unit 4. Deputy Pemberton requesting EMS for my wife, please. We do not need additional armed response. Please confirm." The dispatcher confirmed. She added one sentence. She added, "Sheriff, your wife reported no injuries." I thanked her. I closed the cruiser door. I drove out of the parking lot at 6:03 a.m. with my lights on but no siren. Captain Brewster was on my bumper. We did not break the speed limit. There was no point. The damage was done. The crime was over. The criminals were waiting at the property. The drive from the office to the house is 6 minutes on a quiet morning. I drove it in 5.5. I did not push the speed. I kept the lights on without the siren because I did not want to provoke whatever Penelope was about to say next to anyone listening on the road. Captain Brewster stayed 2 car lengths behind me. I keyed the radio twice on the drive, once to confirm EMS was rolling, once to ask Deputy Pemberton to stay behind to handle any walk-in traffic at the office while we secured the scene. Deputy Pemberton acknowledged. Her voice over the radio was the voice she had used when her father had died in 2019. Flat, careful, holding itself together. I had heard the voice before. I had not heard it from any of my deputies in a long while. I had wanted to thank her at the radio. There had not been time. I pulled up the driveway at 6:09. The dozer was still in our bedroom. Heath Brenner was still standing in the middle of the destroyed room with his hands on his head. Penelope was still at the fence line with her phone, by then mid-call with what I would later learn was her husband's defense attorney. She saw the marked cruiser come up the driveway. She saw the second cruiser behind it. She saw me step out of the lead cruiser in my uniform, with my star clipped to the front of my belt, the same star I had been wearing every workday for 10 years. She did not for a long second recognize me. She had never seen me in uniform. She had never seen me at 5:30 a.m. on a workday. She had never, by my count, looked at my face for more than 3 seconds in any of the encounters she had had with my truck at the road. She said into her phone, "I called the sheriff. He's here." I walked across the lawn to the fence line. I said, "Ma'am, end your phone call." She said into the phone, "Hold on." She lowered the phone. She said, "Sheriff, the homeowner threatened us. He came out with..." I said, "Ma'am, I am the homeowner." She did not understand at first. She said, "I'm sorry?" I said, "Penelope Whitford Briarcliff. I am Anson Tilbury. I have been the sheriff of Marlow County since 2014. I am the owner of this property. I have been the owner of this property for 21 years. My family has owned this property since 1893. The woman you accused me of threatening is my wife. She is in our barn. I am going to her now. Captain Brewster, please secure Mrs. Whitford Briarcliff and Mr. Brenner. They are not to leave the property. Mrs. Whitford Briarcliff." Read the Miranda from Deputy Pemberton when she arrives. We will speak in detail at the courthouse later this morning. The color went out of Penelope's face from the inside. The phone dropped from her hand into the grass. I walked past her. I walked to the barn. Bethany was sitting on a hay bale in the tack room with a horse blanket around her shoulders. She had the office phone in her hand. The dispatcher was still on the line with her. I sat down next to her. I took the phone. I said, "Dispatch, Sheriff Tilbury, I have my wife. Please dispatch EMS for a precautionary evaluation. Please dispatch the KSP detective on call. Please contact Detective Cassidy Harden at Lexington, Post 12. Please contact District Attorney Annika Latimer." Please contact my chief deputy if he is not already on scene. Thank you. I hung up. I took Bethany's hands in both of mine. They were shaking. There was a piece of pink fiberglass insulation in her hair. I pulled it out. I held her for a long minute. She did not cry. She had not cried yet. She would not cry until late that night in our daughter's bedroom, with Lucinda asleep beside her in Lucinda's old twin bed, because the south wing was a crime scene. Captain Brewster handcuffed Penelope at 6:18 a.m. Heath Brenner placed his hands behind his back voluntarily at 6:21, and Captain Brewster cuffed him with appropriate courtesy. By 7 a.m., the south wing was sealed with crime scene tape. KSP Detective Cassidy Harden arrived at 6:56 and took command of the scene. By 8, an EMS crew had transported Bethany to Marlow County Regional for a precautionary CT scan and observation. By 9, Captain Brewster had pulled Penelope's HOA financial records, her photoshopped satellite map, the printed demolition order Heath had received, and her cell phone call log showing 31 prior conversations with Heath Brenner over the previous 2 months that Heath had not yet been asked about. By 10, the district attorney had filed for an emergency arraignment. By lunchtime, Heath Brenner, sitting handcuffed on the lower porch step at 7:14, with Captain Brewster across from him on a folding chair, told us a small detail that made the whole sequence make sense. He told us that Penelope had called him twice in the 3 days before the demolition to confirm the structure description. He told us that during the second call, on the Sunday evening, Penelope had asked him whether he had ever heard of a thing called a satellite parallax error, a phrase Heath had not heard before, and which is, in fact, not a real thing. He had told her no. She had told him that she had been worried that the satellite image she had emailed him might not match what he saw on the ground. She had told him to trust the map and not the eyeballs. Heath had thought it was a strange instruction. He had not, by his own admission, taken it seriously enough. He should have. The instruction had been Penelope's premeditated attempt to overcome his common sense when he arrived at the property and noticed that the structure she had marked was, in fact, the side of a residential house. The phone call would later be cited at her sentencing as evidence of premeditation. The DA used it to argue successfully for the burglary count. The case ran the way a clean case runs when the criminal calls the sheriff first by accident. Heath Brenner pled cooperator within 90 minutes of his arrest. He told Detective Harden every detail. He produced every text message. He produced the bank records of the $8,000 cash payment Penelope had wired him from her Briarcliff Aesthetic Services LLC the previous Monday. He cried during the interview. He apologized to Bethany in writing at the end. He pled out to misdemeanor reckless endangerment in May. 8 months probation. 2,000 hours of community service at Marlow County's Habitat for Humanity build site. A written apology to Bethany, hand-delivered to our porch the day after his sentencing. Bethany read it once. She nodded. She told me to send him a thank you note for being honest. I did. He has a job at a Versailles construction company now. He has not, by his own promise to me at the sentencing, taken an unverified work order since. Penelope Whitford Briarcliff was indicted on 6 felony counts in early May. Forgery of a public instrument under Kentucky Revised Statute 516.020. Criminal mischief in the first degree under KRS 512.020. Reckless endangerment in the first degree under KRS 508.060. Embezzlement of HOA funds under KRS 434.155, the $124,000 Captain Brewster had documented. False report to law enforcement under KRS 519.040, the 911 call, and burglary in the first degree under KRS 511.020 for the unauthorized entry of a dwelling with intent to commit a crime, which is what the photoshopped map and the cash payment to Heath constituted under Kentucky law when she had directed a heavy equipment operator to drive a bulldozer into a structure she knew was a residence. The burglary charge was the one her lawyers fought hardest. The burglary charge was the one DA Annika Latimer cared most about. The burglary charge stuck. Penelope took a no-contest plea in October. 6 years in Kentucky state custody, 3 years probation, $189,000 in restitution, $124 to the HOA reserve fund, $65 to me personally for the structural damage and emotional harm to my wife. A permanent ban from serving on any Kentucky Common Interest Community Board. Gunnar Briarcliff filed for divorce on the 3rd of November. Their daughters from her previous marriage moved to Cincinnati to live with their grandmother. Penelope reported to the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women in Pewee Valley on the 14th of November. She had not made eye contact with me at the sentencing. She did not say a word. The judge entered the sentence at 11:18 a.m. The room rose. The room did not chant. The room walked out into the hallway in the slow, silent way Marlow County does these things. The hospital trip itself was a small piece of Marlow County's quiet generosity. The EMS team, 2 paramedics named Rune Stillwell and Mariah Burdick, knew Bethany from a stable injury call in 2019 when one of her horses had thrown a young rider. Mariah had been the lead paramedic on that call. She had recognized Bethany the moment she walked into the barn. She had hugged Bethany before she had even started the assessment. The hospital ER staff had been alerted by the dispatcher. The charge nurse, a 30-year veteran named Goldie Pemberton, different Pemberton from my deputy, just a Marlow County coincidence of surname, had walked the gurney directly to a private room and personally taken Bethany's vitals. The CT scan had been completed by 8:30. The radiologist on duty was Dr. Halsey Crowfoot, who had been Bethany's vet for one of her older horses 15 years earlier. Halsey had switched specialties to radiology mid-career. The scan was clean. No concussion, no fractures, no internal bleeding. Bethany was kept for observation until 2 p.m. as a precaution. She was released at 2:15. The hospital did not bill us for the visit. The hospital president, a man named Wallace Tyndall that I had worked closely with for 9 years on emergency response planning, had written it off as community care at noon. He had not asked, he had not announced, he had simply made it happen, the way Marlow County makes things happen for people it knows. Bethany came home from Marlow Regional on the afternoon of the day of the incident. She was on light duty restrictions for 2 weeks. The South Wing was a crime scene for 9 days. After the crime scene was released, my brother-in-law and 3 of my deputies and Edmund Brewster, the retired colonel, and his wife Marjorie spent 4 weekends helping us rebuild the South Wing. We added a small sitting room to the wing that Bethany had wanted for 15 years, and we had never had time to design. We saved the chestnut beam from above the bed. Edmund's son, a structural carpenter in Lexington, sistered the split beam with a clean piece of new chestnut, kept the original in place, and bracketed the join with hand-forged iron straps a Bardstown blacksmith named Wallace Crowley made for us at cost. The new wing has a small bronze plaque set into the fireplace mantel above my mother's photograph. The plaque reads in the simplest possible language, "Rebuilt 2024, in thanks for Bethany's life." I had not asked for the plaque. Edmund and his son had made it for us. They had not told me. They had presented it the morning we lit the first fire in the rebuilt fireplace. Bethany cried that morning for the 2nd time. So did I. So did Edmund. So did his son. The Bluegrass Ridge Estates HOA elected a new board in June. Edmund Brewster, the retired colonel, accepted the presidency this time. He runs meetings with the kind of careful efficiency the Air Force taught him for 37 years. The Bluegrass Ridge HOA voted in July to formally apologize to Bethany and to me in a recorded resolution at the annual meeting. 41 of the 48 households signed a personal note that Edmund hand-delivered to our porch on a Sunday morning in August. The note ran 2 paragraphs. The note used the word sorry 3 times. Bethany read it. Bethany framed it. The note hangs in the new South Wing sitting room. Edmund visits every other Sunday for coffee. So does Marjorie. They are old now. They are also the closest friends we have ever had on this road. Tobias drove home from UK the day of the incident. He stayed for the month of April. He helped me brace the temporary tarp wall while the crime scene was being processed. He slept on the living room couch. He drove his mother to her physical therapy appointments. He did not say much during that month. He had not been a young man before. He was a young man by the end. He went back to Lexington in May. He is in his last semester now. He has applied to the University of Kentucky College of Law. He wants to do criminal prosecution. Annika Latimer has written him a recommendation. He will be a careful prosecutor. He has the temperament for it. Lucinda decided in May not to go to the University of Louisville. She had been admitted to the University of Cincinnati's criminal justice program in June, after a late application Annika Latimer also wrote in support of. Lucinda starts there in the fall. She wants to be a victim's advocate. She watched her mother sleep on her bedroom floor for 9 nights in April. She watched her father sit at the kitchen table for 9 nights at 3 a.m., drinking coffee he did not drink. She decided what she wanted to do with her life on the 2nd of those 9 nights. She told her mother on the 4th. She told me on the 6th. She has not changed her mind. Bethany went back to the stable on the 8th of June. She rode for the first time on the 14th. She rode a horse named Clover, a 15-year-old gentle bay she has trained for 8 years. She cried for the 3rd time when she sat in the saddle. Clover stood still. Clover put her ear back the way Clover does when she is paying attention. Bethany rode for 40 minutes. She came home. She drank a cup of tea on the porch. She has been riding every morning since. I won re-election in November by 38 points. My opponent was a young man from Frankfurt who had not lived in the county before. The voters chose to keep me, by what the Marlow County Tribune called a vote of community confidence in a quiet and steady hand. I took the oath again in January in front of my wife, my son, my daughter, Captain Brewster, the entire sheriff's department, and a small contingent of Bluegrass Ridge Estates homeowners led by Edmund Brewster. Edmund applauded the loudest. My wife squeezed my hand the longest. My daughter stood up straight in the 2nd row in her new University of Cincinnati hoodie. My old KSP captain, a man named Wendell Caulfield, who had recommended me for sheriff in 2014 and who had retired in 2019, drove down from Frankfurt the 3rd weekend after the incident with a bottle of bourbon and a handwritten letter. The letter said, in part, "Anson, you did not raise your voice on the radio when the address came over. I listened to the dispatch tape. You held your bearing. You took your wife's hand in the barn. You walked Penelope away in cuffs without a single excess word. The job I recommended you for in 2014 was a job for a man who could do exactly what you did that morning. I am glad I was right. I read the letter twice. I drank the bourbon with Wendell on the porch for 2 hours. We did not talk about the case. We talked about a cold case kidnapping from 2003 we had worked together that had been resolved in 2018 by a DNA match. Some old cases come back. Some old captains drive bourbon down on the right Saturday. I sit on the rebuilt south wing porch in the evenings now with a cup of coffee and the old farm dog Beauregard at my feet, a chocolate lab who is 14 now and mostly retired from chasing groundhogs, and I watch the back pasture in the fading light. The chickens are in the same coop my father built in 1979. The shed is the same shed my mother used to take a chair out to in the afternoons when she wanted to read away from the house. The horses come to the back fence at 6 p.m. for their evening grain. Bethany is in the kitchen usually, putting on a kettle. The sound of the kettle is the sound of all the evenings of our marriage. The south wing is, by every measure that matters, the same room it was on the morning of the 8th of April, the day before. The chestnut beam above our bed has a sister beside it now. The fireplace still draws clean. The wallpaper my mother chose in 1985 has been redone in the same pattern by a careful Lexington restoration shop. The bed is the same bed. The headboard is new because the old one splintered, but the new one is built from a piece of yellow poplar my father had milled in 1979 and left in the barn for a project that he never started. Bethany found the boards on the 18th of April. We had Wallace Crowley, the blacksmith from Bardstown, weld the iron brackets. The headboard sits where the old one sat. It does not look like the old one. It looks like a thing my father started 45 years ago and we finished this spring. Tobias drove down from Lexington the weekend the headboard was hung. He helped me set the iron brackets. He had never worked with wrought iron before. He learned. He hung the brackets at 28 inches on center, the spacing his grandfather had specified in 1979 in a pencil note on the original board edge. The pencil note had still been legible. Tobias photographed the note before we trimmed the boards. The photograph is on his phone. He shows it to his roommates sometimes. He tells them, "That's my grandfather's handwriting. My dad's wife sleeps under it now." He says it the way a young man says a thing he has decided to be proud of. The barn looks the same. The horses look the same. Clover is still gentle. Bethany still rides in the mornings. Lucinda's tuition deposit was paid the 3rd week of June. Tobias's law school application went out on the 10th of November. Captain Brewster will retire next year. Edmund Brewster still hosts the Bluegrass Ridge HOA meetings, with a kitchen timer and a sense of fairness. The wreath ordinance was repealed in his first month. Edmund's wife Marjorie sends Bethany a peach pie every August. We send back the dish with a handwritten thank you each year. The dish has crossed the fence line 9 times so far. The dish is older than the HOA. It will outlast the HOA. The peach pie is also, by Bethany's quiet assessment, the second best peach pie in Marlowe County. The first is my mother's recipe, which Bethany still bakes every July from the recipe card in my mother's hand. The card lives in a tin on the kitchen counter. The tin lives next to the kettle. The kettle lives next to the south wing door. If you have ever had an HOA try to push a wall into your wife's bed and then call the cops on you for noticing, leave a comment below. Tell me what they tried. Tell me what you did back. I read every one. The stories you send me are the reason I keep telling these. If this one warmed you, hit subscribe so the next one finds you. Next week, we've got a single mother in rural Indiana whose HOA Karen tried to tear down her son's swing set. There is a wedding video the Karen did not know was running. That story is coming Friday. In the meantime, keep your badge on the inside. Build slow. Pour somebody else's coffee. Some Tuesday mornings start with a bulldozer through your bedroom wall. Some end with the right people answering the radio. The first night after the incident, Bethany slept in Lucinda's twin bed. Lucinda slept beside her in a sleeping bag on the floor. I sat at the kitchen table from 11 p.m. until 5 a.m. with a cup of coffee I did not drink. Captain Brewster came over at 4 to relieve me. I had not asked him to. He had simply driven up the driveway in his personal pickup, walked in with 2 thermoses of fresh coffee, and sat down across from me. He did not speak for a long time. He took a sip. He set the cup down. He said, "Sheriff, you did exactly right this morning. You took the call. You confirmed the address. You drove home in a marked unit. You did not raise your voice. You arrested the woman who tried to kill your wife. You held your wife in the barn. You went to work today, and you will go to work tomorrow. That is the job. That is also a very long day." I said I knew. He said, "Sheriff, I am going to sit here until 6. You are going to lie down in the den for an hour. That is also the job." I did. I slept for 53 minutes. He sat at the table the whole time with his thermos and the morning paper. When I came back at 6, he poured me a fresh cup. He did not say anything else. He drove home at 6:15. I have not, in 11 years, told him thank you for that morning. He has not, in 11 years, asked me to. That is the story of the South Wing.
Here's the thing about Brenda Whitfield. She had 9 years of unchallenged power and lost everything in a single evening. Not because Garrett was louder or angrier, because he was patient, because he documented, because he understood systems, not just drainage systems, but the legal and brochure system that protect homeowners when the people in charge stop protecting them. That's the real lesson. The strongest weapon against petty authority isn't address, it's recourse. Certified mail, timestamp, FOII request, trail cameras. The kind of evidence that doesn't need you to raise your voice because it speaks for itself. Brenner spent 2 years trying to break a man who built infrastructure for a living. She never considered that he might build a case the same way one layer at a time. Load bearing, nothing decorative. When that wall was finished, it was the one thing she couldn't tear down. If you ever have an HOA president who's treated your neighborhood like a personal kingdom, drop your story in the comments. I read everyone. And if you're new here, hit subscribe. Next week, we got a story of a retired firefighter who discovered his HOA president had been fogging inspection reports for 6 years. You don't want to miss how this one ends. See you next time.